Hello and welcome to Upfront. I'm Kang Chiri. The 2014 ASEAN-Republic of Korea Commemorative Summit is underway in the southern port city of Busan. This is an example of all these drives to strengthen ties among countries in the Asian region. And on today's Upfront, we dig deep into the topic today and tomorrow of such a vision. And as always, we have a great panel of experts for this conversation. To my left, we're joined by Professor Lee Shin-hwa of Korea University, an expert in foreign affairs and security. Welcome to our program. And to my right, Professor Bodovin Walraven of Sungkyunkwan University, who is an expert in Korean and East Asian studies in Europe. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me.
And of course, Mr. Lee Jung-soo, co-president of the Sustainable Development Global Network. Great to have you on.
Thank you.
Now, before we delve into this topic, let's check out this short video clip.
A multilateral diplomacy summit is taking place among rising powers throughout Asia. 10 leaders from ASEAN member countries have gathered in Busan. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a regional community of cooperation that is made up of 10 nations. The ASEAN bloc is strategically located between the Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean. And it is also a dynamic economic region made up of around 600 million people and has a combined GDP of about 2.4 trillion US dollars. This year marks 25 years since Korea was accorded full dialogue partner status by ASEAN. The relationship was elevated from a comprehensive cooperation partnership in 2004 to a strategic partnership in 2010. And this year, Korea is hosting the Commemorative Summit with ASEAN countries.
평화, 번영, 발전의 동아시아 공동체 달성을 위한 구체적인 계획을 만들고 실천에 옮기는 것이 무엇보다 중요하다고 생각합니다. 한국은 그 과정에 적극적으로 참여해 나갈 것입니다. 아세안 정상들과의 상호 방문이 자주 이루어져서 정치, 외교, 경제, 문화 등 모든 면에서 폭넓은 교류가 이루어지기를 기대합니다.
President Park's vision to be a credible partner of ASEAN countries is expected to take shape thanks to the Commemorative Summit.
Well, we have two agenda items that will be discussed at the summit. The first is the overall bilateral relations and cooperative ties between ASEAN and Korea. The second, cooperation on non-traditional security issues with emphasis on climate change and disaster management. Well, ASEAN is becoming increasingly important to Korea. It's our second largest trading partner, and it's our number one destination for Korean tourists, as well as as a number 3 destination for investment by Korea. Through this agenda item, we can really work together with ASEAN and playing a more leadership role on these regional and global issues.
Attention turns to Korea's relations with the rising ASEAN countries based on the nation's trust politique.
So my first question to the panel, I guess, why is cooperating with ASEAN countries so important for Korea?
In 1989, we just started the relation with ASEAN countries. I think in the beginning it was a partial establishment. And then it's in 2 years, in 1991, they're making like a comprehensive agenda. We're just making a cooperation that indicate in only 2 years, right? That indicate the ASEAN is very important, and also vice versa. ASEAN also value the Korea is very important to them. The ASEAN is now number 2, the trade and economic investment partner for us. And as far as I understand, Korea's total trade is $1,000 billion, and out of it, 13% is from ASEAN. And as you all know, in 2015, ASEAN tried to making their own one community called the ASEAN Economic Community, AEC. And if that is realized, they said it's a $2,000 billion will be coming from that region. So economically, of course, it's very important. And we all know about people-to-people exchange or social cultural exchange is very important. And Hanryu is very famous in Southeast Asia. And among those young people from different part of Southeast Asian countries, the Korea is one of the #1 places to come. Well, so ASEAN can be a wonderful place for us to use as a platform for dialogue and having a further negotiation.
And as you briefly mentioned on the backgrounder for the Korea-ASEAN ties, back in 2004 we have a comprehensive cooperation partnership, and then we developed that further into the next level. And then in 2010, we have something called strategic partnership. What exactly does this mean? What do we read off this, Professor?
I would actually say mainly good intentions.
Strategic.
to go further, one step further. So
Right.
it depends all, of course, not on these names, but on concrete measures to ease trade and take away tariff barriers maybe when necessary, when possible maybe I should say. And that's the concrete measures are more important I think than these phrases which show good intentions in a way.
There are at least 6 stages. Like #1, comprehensive strategic alliance, just like what we have with the United States. And then second is strategic cooperation partnership. That's a bit more, like a less alliance, but more than strategic partnership than what we are having now with ASEAN. So let's say China and Vietnam are our strategic cooperation partner. And then third is what we are now talking about, strategic partnership with ASEAN and others. So that is we having in India, Mexico, Russia, and European Union, and ASEAN, we have a strategic partnership. And then fourth is comprehensive cooperation partnership. That's what we make with ASEAN, what we made with ASEAN in 2004. And #5 is mutually trust comprehensive partnership. So, with one partnership, but it's not clear, how much we can have it. And then the last is a comprehensive partnership. Interestingly, Japan doesn't belong to any category yet, probably because of the history problems. Anyway, when we're using strategic in terms of the interstate relations, we have to recognize each other. Both of us can do something together because we do have a capability to play a so-called global role.
When it comes to the 2014 ASEAN-Korea Commemorative Summit, some are calling it the most important diplomacy event that's held in Korea this year, well, according to organizers. And it is the first multilateral summit that's being held in Korea since President Park Geun-hye took office. So quite a lot of meaning that she attaches to this meeting. I want to know which areas of cooperation that we can expect to see most fruitful outcomes this time around.
Well, I think the president identified ASEAN as one of the most important, the biggest, the market, which has about 620 million people, and also their GDP is about 2.4 trillion US dollars. As the professor indicated, that the Korea has gradually increased the amount of trade with the ASEAN countries, and since the end of 2015, ASEAN will build the cohesive economic community, which is really the lower down barriers and the increased trade volume. That means the ASEAN countries will get richer, hopefully. Then the Korea can sell more goods from the IT products to pharmaceutical as well as the health-related products.
All right.
Yeah, and I think actually ASEAN is a very natural partner because it's in Asia. It's relatively near. The Asian countries also are rather small compared to some other players in the region, like China and Japan, for instance. So in a way that they might be a kind of natural partner also for Korea sometimes to counterbalance certain actions from some of the countries like China. That's
Right. Last time that they held this commemorative summit back in 2009, I was actually down in Jeju, and I felt that this relationship is very much oriented around trade. A lot of talk about free trade agreements and whatnot. But I think this time around, they're looking to go a little further than that and touch on political issues, diplomatic issues, possibly security-related issues. Do you agree?
I do agree with it because in 2009, we have to focus on what we have to finish, right? That is FTA.
Right.
But I think although we will talk about comprehensive agenda in this year's summit, still trade and economic issue will be the higher priority, as two gentlemen have mentioned. And about the political and economic issues. As I said, for us, I think once economy should be the higher priority even for this year. Still, political and diplomatic issue, I think Korean government and also Korean academics start to realize the ASEAN is also important, valuable, and also indispensable partner for us, particularly because when we are dealing with North Korea.
Right.
ASEAN Regional Forum, where the ASEAN is built, that is where North Korea was the members, and then we should note that all 10 ASEAN countries has official relation with both South and North Korea, and that also indicate, our North Korean the politics or North Korean diplomacy has to be more globalized now. I think that's what Park Geun-hye administration tried to focus, and in that sense also it is very important to include ASEAN as our critical partners in our global coordination to deal with the North Korean problems, including North Korean question. I'm not sure how much and how deeply we can discuss about this specific issue in this summit meeting, but at least that should be in the table menu, so that we should assure the ASEAN people, we also trust on you when we discuss about the peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula and this region.
All right, and at this point, I want to get a view outside of this panel. The person our team had a chance to meet is a strong advocate of boosting cooperation with ASEAN countries to, in turn, boost Korea's global competitiveness. So meet Mr. Chung Hae-moon from the ASEAN Korea Center.
I think what Korea has achieved over the past 5 decades is something that has inspired the ASEAN people to emulate Korea. And they do believe that Korea has done an outstanding job in terms of transforming the Korean society from agro-based economy into IT-based economies. And also, they marveled at the business environment in Korea, where Koreans were able to build global companies such as Samsung and LG and POSCO. I think, since 2008, the year when the global community was plunged into the financial and economic crisis, I think ASEAN may have been the only region in the world which defied the gloomy forecast by showing an annual average growth rate of 5 to 6% over the last several years. That's why ASEAN has been referred to as the new engine of growth for the world economy.
Then among the ASEAN countries, I want to talk about which country, they're all important to Korea, but there is a priority in terms of, our focus. So which country stands out to you the most?
The Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs identify it called as VIP. Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines.
Okay.
And the first the reason is the combined population. The three countries combined is about 440 million people. And as you see, the market value, that's humongous. And also the Vietnam is the Korean government always doing a lot of the ODA work in Vietnam, the building hospitals and education centers, etc. Indonesia-wise, really the rich the resource, the natural resources available, and we are doing a lot of the trading there and development there as well. And Philippines, of course, that we have been very strong ally over 60 years, and also there is very strong sentiment, and besides the big population. So first, these are countries with a big population. Secondly, that the industrial development and the commercial motives there as well. And thirdly, the historical relationship.
Right.
And if I can add to VIP, I would say Myanmar. As you know, since November 2010, the military rule was having a historic shift to civilians. Of course, it's not purely civilians. That is the military-backed civilian, the government, but still they are willing to open the market and open the countries. So at that time, we having a large discussion what kind of lesson can be drawn for North Korea from Myanmar experience. And also, as we all know, the Myanmar have a rich reservoir of natural resources, and also they having a wonderful historic relics that we appreciate.
Yeah, that's definitely the country to watch for a lot of Korean large conglomerates, I hear. So a lot of people eyeing that country. Now, at this point, let's expand the scope a little bit to go beyond the Korea-ASEAN relations and look at the whole region, the Asian region, and then think about the possibility of making this a regional bloc like the European Union. And I guess this is where you jump in, Professor.
Yeah, I think this is a beautiful ideal, but it will be very difficult to realize because except all the ASEAN countries also have relations with the United States, with China, for instance, also with Japan. How to create a union which is a real union, which has real content, without stepping on someone's toes, it will be very, very difficult, I think, actually. Also because there is a big diversity in political systems. So I think the effort is worth making, I think, but I doubt whether we'll soon get anywhere near what the European Union has been able to achieve.
Okay, a little bit of pessimism that I sense off
Well,
you.
not pessimism, but realism, I
Oh,
think.
realism. Okay. Well, so then, to add to your ideas, is trade imbalance among the countries, the fact that they're in different stages of developing or democracy, as you mentioned, would that be a hurdle in achieving that kind of unity?
Well, as ASEAN's the biggest problem is inequality in terms of the economy-wise. Now you see the poor laborers from poor country goes to working for the rich country in the region, right? So how can we keep such movement? If the whole community becomes one block, it's just impossible to see that how we can the balance of this inequality. And another part where compared to EU is that, it is the reality that there is such a dramatic shortage of the high-skilled labor where to meet the demand of the high IT products as well. So in order to make in terms of the harmonized and the balanced economy or the stabilized community, we really do need to have the educated laborers as well as the equality among the distribution of wealth among the neighboring community.
Okay.
Yeah, the free movement of labor is actually even problematic in Europe. It's one of the main issues when people are against immigration. So too many Bulgarians, Romanians moving to Great Britain, for instance. That's a big issue, and it's because there are these enormous disparities in income.
So if you say Asian community can be possible like a European community, my answer is clear no. Although we have potentials and we also want to do something, well, I can give you at least 3 points. As you mentioned, economic disparity, particularly in Southeast Asia, and of course in Northeast Asia in a way, and also the political system is totally different as well. So those political and economic gap we've been mentioning a lot. Not only economic, political outcomes, but what kind of common value we share is very important. And probably at least Western Europe, when you make your European Unions or European Commission,
bit easier,
you do not have you do have some problem, but you don't have that serious problems. And then the last thing is the leadership. You had Schumann and Monet, but we don't have. We are not only having individual leaders, but we don't have state leaders either.
Yeah,
So that here's hate, and this is a chance for South Korea as a middle power. We can be a balancer, or we can be a coordinator to bring China and Japan get together. But I'm afraid that China and neither China nor like Japan wants us to play some significant role for community building. So those lack of leadership, both at the individual and state level, is one of the key obstacles for us to making Europe like the
Actually, I would like to agree with you, because in the beginning especially, what became the European Union was an extremely idealistic enterprise. One of people who was very important in setting up the first cooperation, he went to Germany and saw how the Germans were really suffering terribly right after the war.
Right.
And rather than being vindictive and say, well, it's their own fault and so on, he said we have to do something to feed people, not only in Germany but also in other European countries. And they did it regardless of you were the former enemy or the former ally. And that in a way that kind of spirit has propelled the European Union, especially sort of strongly in the beginning. People are forgetting about it now. So in the beginning, there were only 6 countries. And then, because they did something that was attractive to the other countries, people wanted to join. So they made it bigger and bigger and bigger until even in recent years, there's still countries that want to join because they see the advantage. And so there's a real advantageous content to it, and that is also something to think about. Not just something which you can have anyway, but something which you can only have when you cooperate.
And you know what? There is another realist that our team met who came out with a rather conservative and cautious take on the feasibility of establishing the ASEAN Economic Community. Let's meet one of them, Jayant Menon, lead economist in the Office for Regional Economic Integration at Asian Development Bank. Mr. Menon, thank you so much for joining us today. First question, you're a pessimist or a realist that we call it in the studio to the prospect of seeing the birth of the ASEAN Economic Community by next year. Why is that?
If you're going to be realistic about realizing the full ASEAN Economic Community, in other words, a single market, single production base, free flow of goods, services, capital, and skilled labor, I think this is going to take a lot longer than one more year. It's hard to actually be sure, but maybe a target of 2025 might be much more realistic, with 2020 as a milestone to check on progress. So I think this will take at least another full decade or more if you're going to fully realize the ASEAN Economic Community.
You don't think the huge economic benefit coming from this economic bloc is enticing enough for these member economies to make this happen fast?
Korea is a very important trading partner of the ASEAN countries. There's a lot of trade in goods and services, a lot of tourism flows between the region and Korea. So Korea needs to continue being engaged with ASEAN, and the same for ASEAN as well. The problem with ASEAN is that there's not too much monitoring once the agreements are signed. There's not much oversight or review, and it's all about the carrot. There's no real stick. So there's no way of forcing compliance. They have a dispute settlement mechanism, but it's never been used. So it relies on goodwill. And so countries must be convinced of the benefits of these reforms before they will be willing to implement them. And governments must be sure to take on the vested interests, the lobby groups that will prevent reform. They need to take leadership to overcome those pressures to make sure that implementation is legitimate. This is the only way the AEC will have a real impact on the ground.
All right, Mr. Menon, thank you so much for coming on to our show today. I gotta leave it there. Really appreciate it. Now, speaking of creating a regional bloc, the European Union has been a pioneer, of course. So here to more about Asia, what Asia can learn from its case, we're connecting with Ambassador Tomasz Kozłowski, Ambassador of the EU to Korea. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. First of all, what do you think about the possibility of Asia becoming a regional bloc, a community like the European Union?
The European Union, being a regional integration organization by its nature, encourages regional cooperation in other parts of the world. For us, regional cooperation is an important building block of international relations and global governance. East Asia has achieved already a lot. East Asia has achieved a high level of economic cooperation and interdependence. Such interdependence demands high level of interaction and cooperation. Therefore, I think, and the European experience shows it to us, some kind of institutional infrastructure in the region is needed. But as I mentioned, the basic already exists in East Asia, the trade and investments, and first of all, the understanding among all countries in the region that certain issues cannot be tackled alone by individual countries. The regional cooperation in East Asia will develop. This is my belief. But of course, I'm not sure that this integration process will be conducted and it will receive the same results as in Europe, as our regions are different, and it depends on your leaders, it depends on your nations, what kind of model of regional integration will be the most suitable to you.
And now being the EU ambassador to Korea, what role do you expect out of Korea to play in this vision?
The experience of European Union shows the importance of political will, strong political will expressed by political leadership, and so-called top-down led processes in building integration. And in this context, Korea's long-standing proactive initiatives towards regional integration represent a like-minded attitude by Korea, very much similar to our experience in Europe. The EU supports, and I would like to underline it once again, the European Union supports President Park Geun-hye's Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation initiatives as an instrument to build trust in the region. And likewise, the European Union maintains close contacts with China and Japan, other important countries in the region. And overall, our message is that the European Union stands ready to share our experience and to contribute as much as possible, of course, if asked, to the development of regional initiatives and regional cooperation projects in East Asia.
All right, Ambassador, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there for now. I really appreciate your thoughts and insights today. So let's come back to our studio, and I want to delve more into the security-related part of this vision, right? So when it comes to security needs, I feel like it needs to be tailored to specific national needs. Then you jump into that alliance or cooperative ties. Is that why it's so difficult to achieve the security cooperation when it comes to the Asian region?
We from Northeast Asian perspective, particularly Korea, that we have to focusing on North Korea or Korean Peninsula issues, those traditional interstate relations where we need some support or like a support from ASEAN. But on the other hand, for ASEAN, it can be more so-called new or comprehensive security support they might need. Not only like a traditional security support or our support for their ethnic conflict, but also many different kind of so-called new security, such as economic security, health security, environmental security. Actually, for Southeast Asia, they are more interested in that kind of security for now. So how we can balance and how we can meet each other and then to think about what kind of help we can give to each other will be very important for security. So in that case, security should be explained or translated into a broader term rather than narrower.
One of the examples, the environmental security, Korea Forest Agency has built the network in 2009 with the ASEAN 10 countries to really supply the technology as well as the examples how the Korea agency successfully managed the forest in Korea. It's certainly that in the broader aspect, this certainly help improves the climate change situation as well as environment security.
Okay, all right. Anything to add to that, Professor Wallerman?
Well, let's talk about North Korea. Of course, it's a huge problem. It's certainly not easy to make any progress on this issue, but I think the countries that used to be or still are on rather good terms with North Korea, they really could do something maybe to establish some trust on the North Korean side, because I think that's also necessary to make them change their behavior. If you see in a way how countries like, for instance, Vietnam and Cambodia have changed over the years, then you see a glimmer of hope. Let me put it this way. I don't know whether it's more than a glimmer, but actually these countries like Myanmar also had rather intense relations with North Korea, so they can do something maybe now that the situation there is changing.
The United States continues its strategic pivot to Asia. China has promoted a similar strategy called the new type of great power relations. Japan is mired in deep-rooted historical and territorial disputes with its neighbors in Asia. And North Korea finds itself in international isolation because of its repeated provocations. These are the main variables that have become threats to regional security. The ASEAN member countries have promoted a plan that aims for regional stabilization and strengthened security. To actively pursue that goal, the ASEAN Regional Forum was established in 1994. The ASEAN Regional Forum is the only consultative group in the Asia-Pacific that discusses multinational security issues and the only one that North Korea participates in. This is one of the reasons the South Korean government wants to cooperate with the ASEAN. ASEAN member countries have actively participated in the process. The Korean Peninsula faces many challenges. Can the government's peace initiative for Northeast Asia be boosted through better cooperation with the ASEAN?
ASEAN countries, because these countries are small countries, and from their perspective, Korean Peninsula issue is too big and too controversial. We have to put these North Korean nuclear issues and peninsula issues as a threat to the whole regional peace and security. If we put these issues forward as a regional security and peace matters, then Southeast Asian countries will be more comfortable to be engaged in North Korean nuclear issue and Korean Peninsula issues.
Well, North Korea is certainly a player in this region that is sort of not really playing in the game, but then it certainly is very much relevant and pose challenges or uncertainties for the other regional players. So then what do we do with North Korea? What kind of role do you think North Korea plays in this vision of creating some sort of regional bloc in Asia? Do you think, I mean, well, for example, when it came to the UN resolution that was recently passed, suggesting that we need to refer the regime's leadership to the International Criminal Court, there were countries in ASEAN that were not really for the idea. They actually said no. So does North Korea hinder the progress of creating that vision and sharing the same value in this bloc?
Well, as long as this kind of process undermine some kind of regime stability in North Korea, or other kinds of disadvantage can be created against North Korea, I think North Korea wouldn't tip in much because they don't have much time left. They're too busy. They're preoccupied with dealing with bilateral relations with the US and China, and also their own domestic economic reforms.
So North Korea may not care so much about this idea. They're too busy, as you called it. Then what about on the South Korea's part? Does Seoul need to sort of bring out, some sort of understanding or cooperation, taking sides with it from ASEAN countries when it comes to the North Korean issue?
Certainly not, I would say, involving them in the negotiations themselves. For instance, the six-party negotiations, in my view, have not been really very helpful. The North Koreans basically want to negotiate with the United States and maybe with South Korea. And we have seen, actually, that also, for instance, Japan at certain moments was not really very cooperative in this process. So I don't think involving more and more nations is going to do the trick. So I would.
There was a recent interesting comment from former Prime Minister of Japan, Yukio Hatoyama. He stressed the high possibility of establishing East Asian community. Although we have many realists here, he's an idealist. And he also added that the biggest challenge facing this region is historical disputes. Do we agree in the studio?
Well, we got looking at reality where I met several the ambassadors from ASEAN countries, and they do acknowledge that Japan has been the most strong aid to their economic development, and also different the public project that Japan has supported enormously. But when it comes to the sensitive issue relating to the history, that still the people in Philippines and people those countries where that the wartime sexual slavery being done, they have the students at these nations learn this fact from textbook as well as their parents, grandparents. So there is a certain fear and certain a strong, I wouldn't say strong, but there is certain sensation that they really wanted to watch what is Japan's intention to create this kind of blog or the group, and also wanted to really see Japan's sincere attitude toward to how their interpretation of history.
Right.
But in my view, there are different kinds of issues. So, for instance, the comfort women issue is really a very serious problem, and there is almost no negotiation possible on that. But if it's something like Dokdo, I don't think you have to negotiate, but there is a kind of, in Korea at the moment, there is a kind of public campaign. You have to love Dokdo, for instance. I used to listen to the radio about a year ago. Every morning was this message, you have to love Dokdo, Dokdo's nature. Maybe you have to visit to be a true patriot. This is in my view, totally unnecessary. And in a way, it creates a kind of public atmosphere in which also the scope within which the Korean government can act becomes smaller, because there's a kind of groundswell of public indignation, which, if you look at it a bit from a distance, there is the Stockholm problem. It is a territorial issue, like many countries have.
And
like
do you think disputes like this and other issues related to Japan when it comes to other Southeast Asian countries over South China Sea and with China, South Korea, do you think they pose hindrance, stumbling blocks to creating the cohesiveness and unity in this region?
They think they made enough apology, but enough apology comes, that recognition about enough apology should come from the person who got apology. If you say sorry to me and I don't think it's serious enough, then I can complain. But you said you're having enough apology, and if you just want to build something else, then I will be very angry, isn't it? So I think Japan should get that message. Enough apology should not be judged by themselves, but judged by other people who suffer from their colonial period. So that's the one thing. And also you mentioned about territory, but in the particular Northeast Asian cases, territory and history was interrelated. Separately interrelated. When we talking about Dokdo, you remember in 1905 and Japan colonizing us, So unless we solve those history problems, it might be very hard for us to go further. As I mentioned about those 6 stages of interstate cooperation partnership I mentioned, and none of the category we are willing to put Japan. Why? Mainly because of the public opinions and also our grievances about Japan's behavior, not only historical behavior or present behavior.
And there is another variable that is not even in this region, but that stays very much important and relevant, and that's Washington, the United States, and of course the Obama administration's pivot to Asia. Why pivot to Asia? Is it China?
China.
Yes. China.
China plus economy.
Going once or twice.
The whole economic configuration also, of course, the so many very strong economies in Asia that makes it almost inevitable.
Okay.
Over the past 10 years before Pivot to Asia coming up, China spent a lot of time and energies and resources onto the Southeast Asia, where a lot of ethnic Chinese live. So they somehow believe, Southeast Asia can be their blood alliance or blood partners. But once U.S. came back, many ASEAN countries seems to be more interested in having a better partnership and better cooperation with the U.S. rather than the U.S. the China. So China, I think, seems to be a bit surprising to note that. So I think China is the very reason for U.S. coming over here, but still I'm not sure whether when you have a U.S. and China on the same footing yet.
All right. So we've had quite a run on this idea. We are trying to stay very realistic about this envisioned regional integration in Asia. Then what kind of policy indication do we take away from this discussion for the South Korean government?
Well, South Korean government must empathize while we are empathizing the economic development cooperation, but other side is cultural exchange and also the people-to-people change, the programs or the initiatives that we need to really touch the heart of ASEAN brothers and sisters.
What do you think about this, regional integration in Asia overall after this hour-long discussion?
Well, although I said from Northeast Asian perspectives, including South Korea, particularly South Korea, is a North Korean factor or other Northeast Asian traditional military security issue are important, and where we want having more support from ASEAN, particularly North Koreans, the problems including nuclear issue and human rights. The Southeast Asian perspectives, those ASEAN countries want having a more assistance or development model and all kind of humanitarian assistance or intervention or PK things when it comes to comprehensive security issues. So I think the level of the security perception seems to be a bit different. but still we have a common ground, that is China, I think. Because we, Korea, I think we are growing enough, but still we are smaller power compared to China and US. But if China and US are cooperating each other or conflicting each other, what kind of the benefit or what kind of the cost we have to endure? We have to be strategically very careful, and also we need some kind of partner who support us or who can be with us, friends countries. I think ASEAN can be a good candidate. Interestingly, the all ASEAN country having a formal relation with both Koreas, right? That can be good sign for us, so that they can be a wonderful channel for us to go to North Korea. But on the other hand, we have to having a more diplomatic effort to persuade them why our value and why our vision, why our policy is better for not only for Korean people, but also regional and global like peace and stability and prosperity.
And Professor Walraven, your final thoughts?
I very much agree with what Professor Lee has been saying also. But then I also would like the conference to think about, in a way, how they can contribute to global prosperity and well-being. So, for instance, it was already mentioned once, but an issue like global warming or the environmental issues, there are other issues, and these are important. There have been big environmental issues, for instance, with Indonesia setting fire, or people in Indonesia setting fire to forests and so on, causing big havoc all over Southeast Asia. These problems actually affect many more people than only the ASEAN countries, and they affect many people anyway also. And I hope that some, in a kind of idealistic vein, also people think of their not only of the profits or the
national
benefits
interest
to national interest, but also of the more global interests.
Okay, and Mr. Yu?
Well, let me share the one story where the Korean government has been working a lot with many different areas. That recently, what I heard is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs now looking at sharing what we are doing best in the world, which is the universal health coverage. That we have such a great system. Now the MOFA is setting the strategy to share, to starting pilot project this with Vietnam, and then to continue to spread around 10 ASEAN countries. This is what the way to make happy people, healthy people in ASEAN. So we really see that being very specific and using our strength to share with that to ASEAN countries, we do more. Then I think we will have a good really partnership with ASEAN countries.
That's right. That's a good example of which direction we should go in achieving this goal. Now, thank you so much, all three of you, for coming in today and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, our viewers, for watching. That does it for this edition of Upfront, but stay with us online for your thoughts as well. I will see you next time.